He thought it was just another traffic stop, just another man in a nice car he could put in his place. But the moment Sergeant Daniel Mercer gathered saliva in his mouth and spat in the face of a calm black driver on the side of Highway 17, he unknowingly sealed his own fate, because the man standing in front of him, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit and watching him with unnerving composure, wasn't just a traveler passing through Redwood Plains, Alabama. He was the city's newly appointed chief of police, and Mercer was about to learn that power used recklessly has a way of circling back with terrifying precision. The late afternoon sun pressed down like a physical weight on the asphalt, turning the air above the highway into shimmering waves of heat, and Mercer sat inside his idling patrol cruiser with the air conditioner blasting and a toothpick grinding between his molars. 22 years on the force carved into his thick neck and permanent squint. A man who believed the badge on his chest made him untouchable, who liked to think of himself as the guardian of Redwood Plains, but had slowly become something else entirely, something harder and meaner, a bully wrapped in authority, watching traffic crawl by until a midnight blue Mercedes S-Class appeared in the distance, moving with deliberate precision, not speeding, not weaving, just gliding at 54 miles per hour in a 55 zone. Too careful, Mercer muttered to himself. Too clean, too composed, and, without any real justification beyond a restless irritation simmering in his chest, he flipped on his lights and gave a short burst of the siren, the Mercedes signaling immediately and easing onto the shoulder in one smooth motion. No panic braking, no hesitation, and Mercer took his time stepping out of the cruiser, adjusting his belt, resting his palm briefly on the grip of his service weapon, a habit he had developed years ago to remind drivers who held the power in these roadside encounters. Aviator sunglasses sliding into place as he approached the driver's side window without knocking, simply standing there until the glass lowered with a soft electric hum, revealing a black man in his mid-40s, clean-shaven, high cheekbones, calm dark eyes, wearing a suit that looked expensive without being flashy, hands positioned deliberately at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, posture straight, expression unreadable, not defiant, not submissive, just steady, and that steadiness irritated Mercer more than open hostility ever could. License and registration. Mercer barked, skipping any greeting, and the man nodded slowly, voice deep and controlled as he said, "It's in the glove compartment. Officer, I'm reaching for it now." His movements deliberate and visible, but Mercer snapped back, "Just get it." Impatience lacing his tone, and when the documents were handed over, Mercer scanned the name, Marcus Ellington, Washington, D.C. address, and leaned slightly into the windowsill. His breath filled the cabin. "Long way from home," he muttered. "What brings you to Redwood Plains?" And Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "Work," he replied evenly. "I'm relocating." Mercer's jaw tightened. "What kind of work?" And there was the slightest pause before Marcus answered, "Law enforcement," which drew a sharp, mocking laugh from Mercer, loud enough to startle a bird from a nearby power line. "You? Law enforcement? What are you, mall security?" But Marcus didn't rise to it, didn't argue, didn't smirk. He simply said, "Something like that," and the calm refusal to engage felt like a personal insult to Mercer, who thrived on reactions, on nervous apologies or angry outbursts he could escalate into citations or arrests. So he stepped back from the window and ordered, "Step out of the vehicle." And Marcus complied without protest, unbuckling his seatbelt and stepping onto the gravel shoulder, standing tall, a few inches taller than Mercer, dust swirling faintly around his polished shoes, and Mercer closed the distance between them, invading his space, trying to provoke something, anything. "You think you're better than me?" Mercer growled. "You think that suit makes you special?" And Marcus's voice remained steady. "I believe you conducted a stop without probable cause, Sergeant." The glance at Mercer's nameplate precise and intentional, and that single word, "Sergeant," delivered without fear, snapped whatever thin thread of restraint Mercer still had, because in that moment he felt mocked, exposed, diminished. The authority he depended on suddenly questioned by a man who refused to bow to it, and anger surged hot and reckless through his veins. "I am the probable cause," Mercer shouted, stepping closer until they were nearly chest to chest. "You're in my town now, and you better learn how things work around here." But Marcus did not move, did not flinch, his gaze steady, almost disappointed, and that look, more than any insult, ignited something ugly inside Mercer, something driven by pride and prejudice and the desperate need to assert dominance, and without thinking about consequences, without considering witnesses or cameras or the possibility that this moment might follow him beyond the roadside. Mercer gathered saliva in his mouth and spat, the wet sound shockingly loud in the still air as it struck Marcus on the cheek, and time seemed to freeze, the distant hum of traffic fading into the background. Mercer stepping back with a twisted smirk, waiting for the swing, the shove, the reaction that would justify escalation. But it never came, because Marcus did not swing, did not curse, did not wipe it away immediately. He simply stared, memorizing Mercer's face, badge number, posture, the emptiness behind the mirrored lenses, and after a long, suffocating pause, he reached calmly into his breast pocket, removed a folded white handkerchief, wiped his cheek with careful precision, folded the cloth again, and tucked it back into place. "Are we done here, Sergeant?" he asked softly, voice almost gentle, and the lack of fear in that tone unsettled Mercer more than anger ever could. So he waved dismissively and muttered, "Get out of here before I change my mind." Watching as Marcus returned to the Mercedes and drove away with smooth composure, leaving Mercer alone on the shoulder with a strange chill creeping under his uniform despite the Alabama heat, a feeling he brushed aside as nothing more than lingering irritation, not yet realizing that the man he had just humiliated on an empty stretch of highway was arriving in Redwood Plains not as a visitor, not as a subordinate, but as the new chief of police, and that this single, impulsive act of cruelty would soon unravel everything Mercer believed he controlled. The next morning, Redwood Plains Police Department carried the tense buzz of transition, but Sergeant Daniel Mercer walked in as if he were untouchable, coffee in hand, joking with younger officers about a DC suit he had handled the day before, confident the incident would dissolve like so many others he never documented, because for 22 years Mercer had operated under the belief that seniority equaled immunity. When the intercom ordered all sworn personnel to the briefing room for a mandatory assembly, the room filled quickly, uniforms stiff, whispers low, the mayor standing beside an empty podium as he spoke about integrity, reform, and federal-level leadership, words Mercer dismissed with a smirk until the side door opened and the mayor announced, "Please welcome your new chief of police, Marcus Ellington." And Mercer's confidence evaporated as the man from the midnight blue Mercedes stepped forward in a crisp black chief's uniform, for gold stars on his collar, posture steady, expression composed, eyes scanning the room before locking directly onto him with unmistakable recognition. The silence felt suffocating as Chief Ellington calmly outlined sweeping policy changes, mandatory body cameras activated at all times, independent oversight on use of force cases, zero tolerance for discriminatory policing. And Mercer realized with a sinking weight that this was not a ceremonial appointment, but a structural shift. And when the meeting ended and officers rose in uneasy murmurs, Ellington's voice cut through the noise. "Sergeant Mercer, my office." The walk down the hallway feeling longer than any patrol shift as colleagues avoided his gaze. Inside the office, Ellington placed a tablet on the desk and pressed play, turning the screen so Mercer could see high-definition dash cam footage from the Mercedes. The audio sharp, Mercer's own voice replaying in cold clarity, the escalation, the mocking tone, and finally the spit captured without ambiguity. And for the first time Mercer saw himself from the outside, stripped of justification, reduced to arrogance and hostility. "You assaulted a civilian," Ellington said evenly. "And you did so under the authority of this badge." Mercer swallowed and grasped for defense. "Chief, I didn't know who you were." But Ellington's response was calm and devastating. "That's exactly the problem." Before sliding a formal notice across the desk, immediate administrative leave, surrender of badge and firearm, referral to the district attorney, and adding, "The footage will be released publicly at 6 p.m. And in that moment Mercer understood this would not be buried in paperwork or shielded by loyalty. It would unfold in the open. And as he walked out to turn in his badge, the subtle shift in the air was undeniable. The power he had wielded for decades no longer his. The man he tried to humiliate now firmly in control of both the department and the narrative. By the end of the week, Daniel Mercer understood something he had never truly believed before. Power can vanish faster than it arrives. Because the video Chief Marcus Ellington released at exactly 6 o'clock spread through Redwood Plains like wildfire, first local news, then national outlets. Then social media looping the same humiliating clip of Mercer's sneer, and the moment the spit left his mouth, frozen frame by frozen frame, and the man who once strutted through the precinct like an untouchable veteran suddenly found himself locked out of the very building he thought he owned. The district attorney announced formal charges within days: assault under color of authority, civil rights violations under review, and the department publicly supported the investigation. A statement signed by Chief Ellington that was firm, direct, and absent of personal commentary, which somehow made it sting more, because there was no visible vendetta, only process, and Mercer's calls to former allies went unanswered, the union representative offering limited legal guidance, but no passionate defense, fellow officers avoiding eye contact in grocery store aisles, neighbors pulling curtains closed when news vans parked outside his house. And for the first time in his career, Mercer felt what it meant to stand alone. The trial was swift and clinical, the prosecution playing the footage in open court where every juror watched in silence as Mercer's own words and actions dismantled his credibility. No conspiracy, no manipulation, just evidence. And when the guilty verdict came back, the judge's voice steady as she spoke about the sacred responsibility of a badge and the damage caused when authority becomes abuse. Mercer felt the finality settle over him like concrete hardening. His sentence measured not only in years, but in the permanent loss of the identity he had wrapped himself in for decades. Chief Ellington did not celebrate publicly, did not grant interviews boasting of reform. He simply continued implementing policy changes, expanded community oversight, and held open forums where residents who once feared traffic stops now spoke without trembling. And slowly Redwood Plains began to shift, complaints declining, transparency increasing, a department forced to confront the culture it had normalized, while Mercer, now inmate number 77142 in a federal correctional facility, traded patrol routes for mops and metal trays. His days reduced to routine and silence, the echo of boots in hallways replacing the hum of a squad car engine. And one quiet afternoon, while pushing a mop across a dull cafeteria floor, he glanced up at a mounted television broadcasting a segment about law enforcement reform in small-town America. Footage of Chief Ellington shaking hands with residents outside a community center, the caption reading, "Restoring Trust in Redwood Plains." And Mercer felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest, not rage, not defiance, but a hollow recognition that the man he had tried to belittle had never needed to destroy him. Because Mercer had done that himself the moment he chose humiliation over restraint, ego over duty, prejudice over professionalism. An inmate brushed past him roughly, muttering for him to move, and the old reflex to demand respect flared briefly before fading just as quickly, replaced by a quiet, almost stunned understanding of how completely his world had changed. And as he lowered his eyes and resumed mopping, the rhythmic swish of water against tile the only sound anchoring him, Daniel Mercer finally grasped the lesson he had spent a lifetime avoiding. The badge was never a shield for his pride. It was a responsibility he failed to carry. And the man he spat on had not risen through revenge or fury, but through composure and integrity, proving that in the end it wasn't power that decided their fates, it was character.